All right, what is up, and welcome back to the Build a Better You podcast. I'm your host, Austin Chan, and today we are going to be talking about the top 10 most common muscle building mistakes I've seen in both my lifting career and also working with people, and also just seeing people at the gym, because time and time again, these are the things that come to my head the most, or the things that I've seen most people do every single day when I'm at the gym. And it's just the ones that seem to perpetuate the most. Like, although I've been lifting for about 10 years now, these are the most common ones that still pop up every single time. And it doesn't seem to be one of those things where you definitely notice some things have changed over time in terms of people picking better exercises now, people really practicing good form and all that. For the most part, people are really good about that, but these are the ones that despite everything being evolved in the commercial gym setting, these are still some of the things I see a lot of people make on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully by just simply talking about these and giving you some advice on how to better fix or even just make small improvements in these, maybe you can help kind of, push this knowledge further out so that we can reduce the amount of mistakes, or the simple depth of these mistakes are being made in terms of working out. And hopefully this will help you, help your friends, help your family, and all that, to making the gym a better place to work out and helping you, especially you, get towards the goals that you do want to achieve. But before we get into it, I do want to do a small plug that I will be accepting online coaching clients starting October. By the time I release this, it will be October. I'm recording this on the 30th of September. And if you are currently struggling, or if you're not struggling and just want some source of accountability for your goals, or you want a fitness or nutrition plan just to take the guesswork out of it, just so you can kind of offload that and have someone to do all of your programming for you, that I know that's definitely one of the benefits that a lot of the clients that I'm working with for a long time now, they pretty much know exactly what to do, but they just like having a training program, they just like having a nutrition plan, they just like having the accountability of me there, doing all the programming for them so that they don't have to think about these things. And also on the other side of the spectrum, if you're currently struggling with your fitness goals, if you're struggling with knowing exactly what to do in terms of your training sessions, you walk in the gym aimlessly, you don't really have a plan to do, or if you're struggling with your nutrition right now, and you don't really know what to do in terms of how many calories you need to eat, or the protein intake, or what kind of foods to eat, I can also do that. That is also a part of my online coaching program. And also, if you just simply need a source of accountability, I know this is a huge thing for a lot of people. You can know exactly what to do, but if you don't follow through and actually put in the work, you're not going to see the results. And just definitely having me as a source of contact, and just knowing that I'm there to make sure you're getting all the shit that you need to do done, that definitely helps a lot in terms of helping people achieve their goals. Because like I said, time and time again, consistency is the number one predictor of success. And it's quite frankly the most important thing, because you can have everything else dialed in, but if you aren't consistent with it, you're not going to see an ounce of progress. So if this is something you are interested in, go ahead and click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to my online coaching landing page, and then from there you can click the link to go to my application and fill that out, and I will reach back out to you through email within 48 to 72 hours of receiving your application. But other than that, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this podcast. So the top 10 most common muscle building mistakes, in my opinion, at least. But I'm sure that some of you will definitely agree with this if you have been in the fitness space for quite some time now. So number one, it's going to be thinking that building muscle is about moving as much weight as possible. Now, this is a mistake that I've made in the past. I thought that, if you want to build a lot of muscle, then you should be lifting big weights. And this does have some merit to it. This does have a little bit of truth to it. People who are bench pressing the 100-pound dumbbells, for example, or, squatting 300, 400 pounds, or being able to deadlift 500-600 pounds. Obviously, these people are very strong and very muscular, because you need to have a certain level of muscle base in order to lift that much amount of weight. There's no way around it. You can't be a super tiny person. I mean, there are a few anomalies, but for the most part, a bigger muscle will result in a stronger muscle. But this is just not, but that often gets taken a little bit too far. And I found myself doing this too. I thought that, if I just simply found all the different ways to optimize my progress in terms of trying to lift the most weight, that I would get bigger. But it works until a certain point. At a certain point, you find that you make these marginal increases, but you're not too sure if it's because you're actually making progress, or if it's actually just because you're making these small adjustments that don't have anything to do with building muscle. For example, a lot of your big compound movements, like your back squat and your deadlift, there are ways to increase the amount of weight that you're lifting, but not necessarily gain muscle as a result of that. For example, especially when you're doing these big barbell compound movements, there are a lot of ways that, in fact, even a lot of professional powerlifters use to maximize their leverage. So basically what this is just positioning your body, or positioning the bar, or just positioning the lift a certain way so that you can move incrementally more weight. Because in the sport of powerlifting or other weightlifting sports, the goal is to lift the most amount of weight possible. For these people, it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not they're building more muscle as a result of their small tweaks or changes that they do, but rather they just want to lift the most amount of weight possible, because that's ultimately the number that's going to get recorded and determine whether or how well they are performing in terms of their sport or competition. So for these people, it doesn't necessarily matter. But for the average person who wants to build more muscle, literally optimizing these things for maybe an extra 10, 15, 20 pounds on top of your lifts, it's not very beneficial. I mean, unless you are planning on competing, then that's something to consider. But for the most part, for your training specifically, you should be focusing on executing the kind of principles that really focus on building muscle and really optimizing your movement in terms of loading the muscle. Because one of the things that I see a lot of people do, and myself included, when we start to go down this rabbit hole of trying to maximize leverage, trying to do for the sake of anything just to marginally lift a little bit more weight, you then start to do things that don't optimize the loading of the actual tissue that you want to load, which in this case is muscle. And so instead you start to load things like your tendons, your ligaments, your other joint and passive connective tissue. And this ultimately, the first, you do it a few times, it doesn't matter all that much. But the reality is, weightlifting, a lot of the injuries that come with weightlifting is more long-term, more chronic injuries that come from just years or months and months, or in years and years of repetitive movements that don't optimize your biomechanics and don't optimize the way that you're doing the lift. And so this leads to injury down the road, and which obviously we don't want, because if you want to be making gains for the long term, you don't want to get any injuries, because nothing is anabolic, or nothing is going to be lead to much progress if you're injured in bed or if you can't lift. Lifting is the thing that's going to get you the results. So if you put yourself in bed, if you put yourself out of commission, that there's nothing progressive about doing that. So yeah, from a longevity perspective, if you want to be doing this for a long time, you definitely want to learn more about mechanics and really optimizing the loading. And which brings me to kind of the point of not trying to move as much weight as possible, but rather learning about the mechanics of your body and really learning about movements to fit your body, rather than trying to do all these funky things just to lift incrementally a bit more weight. And the goal of building muscle is not to lift as much weight as possible, but rather how can you make that lift so that it targets your muscles the most? Because again, that's the tissue that we want to be growing. That's the tissue that is the most adaptive under stress. If you think about your tendons and ligaments don't adapt all that much, although you do get a little bit more strength as you do strength training over time. But when you overload a tendon, or ligament or other joint structures, they can get damaged very easily, and they take a very, very long time to heal. Whereas muscle gets damaged on a regular basis if you're doing a lot of resistance training, and it heals pretty quickly, within days, whereas tendons and ligaments can take upwards of weeks, months, and even years in some cases. If it's a really bad injury, it can take upwards of a year for a full, physical therapy program to get you from non-functioning to like fully functioning and take that long, just because of the way these structures are built, and just the way that they are in general, how their anatomy and everything works, just the way things are. Unfortunately, it sucks, but that's just the way that these passive connective structures are. But yeah, this brings me back to kind of that previous point of building muscle is about doing movements that really load the muscle as much as possible. So don't think about trying to lift as much weight as possible. I mean, obviously you do want to be lifting a good amount of weight in order to get that stimulus of building muscle. However, you want to do that within reason. You want to be trying to move as much weight as you can in order to target that muscle to grow, but you don't want to always be chasing just trying to lift more weight. And yeah, there you have it. Just focus on getting that muscle to do as much weight, which obviously it's definitely not going to be as much weight as you wanted to lift if you were to maximize leverages and all that. But for the sake of building muscle, you're still going to be able to lift a significant amount of weight. You still want to be able to lift a good heavy amount of weight in order to get that stimulus for that muscle building, remodeling, regrowth process. But you don't want to be overdoing it to the point where you're just simply trying to add pounds onto the bar, to your lift or whatever, just for the sake of doing it and just making these small tweaks that you don't even know why you're doing them. And then now that about covers the first point there. And the next point here I wanted to get into is not dedicating a proper nutrition plan to facilitate muscle growth. Now, this is a mistake that admittedly I have made again in the past, but this is also something I see a lot of people do, and I found myself in kind of this rabbit hole a few years ago. So the main mistake I see with this is that a lot of people get stuck in kind of the mindset or the cycle, if you will, of being afraid to get into a calorie surplus to maximize muscle growth. And this usually comes in the fear of being afraid to get more fat, or being afraid to lose their aesthetics, or just putting on a lot more body fat than they initially want to. And yeah, this is like totally reasonable train of thought. Like for a lot of people who are afraid of this, they have been overweight at some point. So I can totally understand where you're coming from. This is definitely the mindset that I got into when I first got kind of lean, and then I had to get myself into a surplus phase. I was just simply afraid of getting fat. I didn't want to, kind of lose the reins, and the fact that I worked so hard to get into a calorie deficit and finally get lean for the first time, the thought of actually gaining weight scared me, because of the fact that I don't want this to go into a slippery slope, and I don't want to gain a ton of body fat and put myself in the exact situation that I've worked so hard to get out of in the first place. But I'm here to tell you that first off, that initial fear of adding more calories in your diet can be very scary, to say the least, because again, you don't want to slip back into your old habits and just eat everything in sight and just put on a bunch of body fat and kind of go back to square one. But on the other hand, you have to also realize that it's not that easy to put on a bunch of body fat. If you think about your first time around where you gained a ton of body fat, none of that happened over the course of a few weeks or a few months. A lot of it happened over several months, anywhere upwards of 5 to 6 months to even years down the road. And that really is what it boils down to. You may not have been aware or present of all of the bad habits you're forming over the course of several months and years, but that's just simply the reality. Progress in either direction will take time, so do not be afraid to add more. In fact, if you actually get into a dialed surplus, you're going to see so much more results in terms of muscle growth. And this is something a lot of people don't realize. And there's a huge difference between just going off the rails and eating everything in sight, and also having a very small controlled surplus. If you do it small and controlled, it's controlled. If you're getting to the point where you notice that you're putting on a little bit too much body fat, you can always dial back down. Whereas if you just went off the reins, it's going to be very hard to kind of reel yourself back in. And the key point here is controlled. If you for example, if you're going through a current fat loss phase, or if you have gone through a fat loss phase, you know that you were in control of that deficit. You weren't just randomly starving yourself. You're in control of that deficit, and you know that you're going to be making progress as long as you stay in that deficit. This works the exact same way in terms of a surplus. If you stay slow and controlled and you know what you're doing, you're going to make slow and controlled progress. And you know that you can either dial back or add more whenever you want to, just because you know that you're in control. And this is a huge part of it. Just know that you are in control of everything the whole time, and you can always change things up if you need to. But because you're doing it slow and controlled, you're not going to drastically just gain a ton of like body fat overnight and just lose all of your progress. And that's just simply irrational. And you just have to really dig deep down and work on yourself and really question, like, why am I fearful of this? Is this something rational to be fearful of? And like really look back in the past, is like put yourself in check. Like, did I really gain a ton of weight over the course of like a month or a few weeks? Like, chances are you didn't. It was over the course of several months and years that it took you to undo. I wouldn't say undo, but to just like gain a bunch of weight and really put yourself out of good health. So yeah, in terms of surplus, I recommend just starting with adding 10% of your calories on top of your maintenance. That's a very good place to start for a lot of people. For a lot of people, that will equal out to 100 to 300, unless you're eating upwards of like 4,000 calories, but which most people aren't unless they're super active. But for most people, 1 to 300 calorie surplus is a very good place to start. A good measurement of if this calorie surplus is working is obviously if you are gaining weight on a trending basis. Like if you're gaining anywhere from like a half pound to 1 pound a week, especially when you're first starting out, you can gain a lot more weight. But as you are more trained, it's definitely going to be like half pound to 1 pound like per month in terms of like muscle growth. And that's really the truth about how long it takes to build muscle, about half pound to 1 pound per month as you kind of get more into it. I mean, for the first year, you can probably get away with half pound to 1 pound per week. But after that first year, then you kind of things start slowing down a little bit, just because the law of diminishing returns. This is why not everyone is walking around 300 pounds of pure muscle jacked. That's just a simple way of life. That's just a simple truth about genetics. And another point I wanted to touch on in terms of the second point here with the proper nutrition plan is that a lot of people are also afraid to kind of lose the leanness. They think if they look softer, they won't look as good, which I can totally understand. Like, you know, having like a ripped six pack definitely like looks good, especially when you're getting a ton of compliments. And it also doesn't help that some people just comment on people's body image for like just the sake of doing it, which, you know, fuck these people. But that's just a simple way of life. People will comment on shit. People will say things about stupid things that like don't really matter. And it's just kind of getting over that and really not giving a fuck about what other people think, and just really doing what you think is best for you. I mean, if you don't care about building more muscle, and if you just want to stay lean and you don't have any trouble doing that right now in terms of like your diet plan, your lifestyle, your training plan and all that, you don't have a problem staying at where you are. But more often than not, I find that a lot of people want more. Like once you are able to achieve a certain level of muscle development, you're going to be like, wow, this was amazing. I didn't know I would be able to do this. And now I just want to do more. So as humans, I think we just always have this insatiable hunger for more, especially if we know we can do something. So one of the things that you just have to accept is that if you want to achieve more muscle development, you cannot be as lean as you really want to be. And that's just the sad part. It's just, if you want a lot more muscle development than you have, you just have to be in a surplus, because the whole muscle building process takes a lot of energy. And so your body needs excess energy, because at the end of the day, the muscle building process, if you think about it at its very base, it's your body literally trying to create more contractile fibers, trying to create more contractile proteins in the form of muscle fibers. And so your body's not going to be very good at that if you're not giving it enough energy, because it's literally trying to create more of you, like out of like other things that you're eating. So in order to do that, it's going to need energy from somewhere, which comes from food, obviously. So if you want to, achieve greater things, just know that you have to possibly do things that won't exactly align with what you very want. And that's just a simple truth. And one of the things I've realized is I've been in a kind of maintenance gaining phase for like the past year now, and it's been very slow and controlled. And I haven't been tracking all that much at all. I just know, depending on how my weight is trending, depending on what I look like in the mirror, that's basically what I've been using for my guide. And I don't think I ever want to go back into a cutting phase, because I'm like eating just enough so that I'm making progress in the gym. I'm making visible gains in the mirror as well, but I'm also not overdoing it to the point where like, I just lose my abs in a time span of like a few weeks or a few months. Like even after doing this for a year, like I still have visible abs. I still think I look pretty good in the mirror. And so I don't feel the need to think like I have body dysmorphia and I just need to cut right away. Although, I mean, sometimes a lot of people deal with body dysmorphia in terms of that, like people think they're just gaining a ton of body fat. And again, this is something that you kind of have to put into perspective. If you're gaining like a few pounds and you look a little bit softer than normal, this is not something to freak out, because objectively, you still might be really in shape. You still might be really lean. So again, all that stuff is kind of in your head of you comparing yourself to yourself. And you just kind of have to put things into perspective of like, do I really look that fat? It's like, am I really to the point of adding so much body fat that my health is degrading? And, 9.9 times out of 10, not really. So, calm the fuck down, take a chill pill, and just really put things into perspective as to, whether you're making choices that are detrimental to your health, or if it's like, that it's uncomfortable, ultimately that it's better for you. And you really have to just work that out for yourself. Now, the third point here, it's going to be sacrificing form for weight. And truth be told, I think, maybe one person out of 10 at the gym I see, it's just someone who doesn't give a shit about form and just really wants to move as much weight as possible. But 9 times out of 10, I don't think people are necessarily doing this on purpose. And that's just what I want to preface this point by saying, is that I don't think anyone really sacrifices form for weight on purpose. I think for the most part, especially in terms of like personal experience, like I've never ever done a lift where I was like, okay, I'm just going to purposely try to move as much weight as possible and really like not focus on my form. But I think this ultimately comes from the fact that people don't keep themselves accountable. And, one day, like, let's say you've been lifting with very good form for a long time, and one day you do a small tweak and your form is not as pristine as you would like it, but you were able to add 5-10 pounds to your lift. And so now you're like, okay, I was able to make and then you get into the head of like, okay, I was able to make progress and my form wasn't too bad. Like if I were to rate it, it was probably 95 out of 100. And so you go, okay. And then next time around when you're doing that lift, you kind of give yourself that gray zone of, as long as I hit 95 out of 100, like I'm good to go. I can count that as a PR. I can count that as a good lift. And then maybe next time around you do a 90 out of 100 and you're like, okay, it wasn't that bad compared to like the 95 out of 100. And so you kind of let yourself slowly slip and slip and slip until one day you injure yourself, or one day you tweak something and you're wondering like, why the heck, like I felt like my form was really good, but I don't know why I injured myself, or you just stopped making gains. And this is just simply the fact that you kind of dug yourself into that rabbit hole of, sacrificing form for weight. And again, I don't think people do this necessarily on purpose, but it's just kind of that slippery slope. If you aren't like really accountable, if you aren't really like really stingy about your form, you can definitely lead yourself down this rabbit hole of like letting loose from time to time, and then eventually it'll just degrade, and then eventually you won't make progress because your form's gonna be like bad, not super bad, but it's gonna be bad enough to the point that you're not targeting the specific muscles that you want, or even worse, you might get yourself injured because your form isn't as pristine as you would like it, and so you ended up tweaking something because your form was off enough so that you started compensating with other movement patterns. And yeah, ultimately we don't want that. But the thing here is that you just really have to be accountable and very, very like stingy with your form. Something that helps is like recording videos of your lifts and making sure that you are doing the absolute best you can to maintain proper form, and just really getting to mindset of like knowing that progress doesn't always have to be adding more weight to the bar. It doesn't always have to be adding more reps for the sake of doing it. It can also be doing the same weight or doing even less weight with better form. And that's really a really good form of progress as well, is just doing the same weight or doing even less weight, or just bettering your form overall, because then by doing that, you actually set yourself up for success later down the road. And I know it's hard for us humans to think about this in terms of long term. Like we just want, I'm just gonna make progress today and that's it. And whereas if you think about perfecting your form, that's really, you're gonna be able to make a lot more progress long term and a lot more down the road. Whereas if you satisfy this quick fix need, eventually your form will degrade, and eventually maybe over the long term you just end up injuring yourself, and then, or even over the longer term, that causes you to lose gains or set you back because you got injured. Whereas if you had practiced at good form the entire time, then you just keep using that good form, and you actually make gains more over time because you're not injuring yourself and you're not setting yourself up for like failure in terms of managing form. And so that's basically what I wanted to cover for this point here. Next point is not resting long enough in between sets. And there's still a lot of debate, even though I don't know why. A lot of the research now points to longer rest periods being superior for hypertrophy or building muscle. And I think this mainly comes from the myth. I've seen a lot of like kinesiology and like lifting and strength and conditioning textbooks saying that a good range for hypertrophy rest times is 60 to 90 seconds, which is completely outdated information. We have so much more information on that now, and I believe there was a study done by Brad Schoenfeld that said longer periods of rest are superior for hypertrophy. Like they did a comparison, and like the people who rested 2 to 3 minutes in between sets like blew it out of the water compared to the amount of gains that the people who rested in shorter rest periods. And I believe that's a part of the myth. And also there's another part where a lot of people get into the mindset of like, oh, I just got to get this workout in. If I take shorter rest periods, that means I can do more in terms of more exercises and more work, and more work equals more results. And that's kind of the spiral that I see a lot of people get into, when that's really not the case. I think in terms of like efficiency, like more is not better. Better is better. Like how can you make your exercises better and more efficient? How can you make your current workout program better and more efficient, rather than thinking, how can I always add more? Because that's not necessarily going to get you more results. If anything, that's going to get you worse results, because as you add more and more, you're just simply making your body have to recover from more. Just making your body have to recover from more, which ultimately leads to burnout, and then you're going to be setting back your progress overall. But if you focus on how can I make the exercise that I'm doing like right now, how can I make that better, then you're going to actually get more gains, because you're not overloading your body with so much stuff that it has to do that I can't recover from, but rather you're just thinking about ways to optimize with what you currently have right now. And although you might not make a ton of progress, and again, we want to think about this in the long term, you're not going to make a ton of progress right away, or you might not feel like it, but you're actually going to be making more progress overall. Whereas like if you're just trying to rush everything, I know it can feel very satisfying in that moment to just get a good workout in, get a really good sweat in, get your heart rate up. But again, those are not good indicators of exercise. Not good indicators of a good workout or training program. But rather, a good training program is one that you can really focus on, getting more progress over time in terms of lifting more weight, lifting the same amount of weight from more reps, lifting the same amount of weight with better form. And those are better measures of progress rather than trying to sweat as much as possible, trying to get your heart rate up as much as possible, trying to make yourself feel like throwing up. And don't even get me started. I hate it when people say like, oh, my trainer made me like almost want to throw up, but that's another point of discussion for another time. But ultimately, the saying goes, more isn't better, better is better. Like, how can you think of ways to make your current training regimen better rather than trying to just simply add more for the sake of adding more, thinking that's going to do better? All right, that about covers it for that point. And then next thing we have is not training hard enough or not training near failure. So what do I mean? First off, let's cover what does training to muscle failure mean. Training to muscle failure is basically training to the point where you cannot do another rep if you tried. Like if someone had a gun to your head and said, I need you to do one more rep, you would go to the point until you couldn't do one more rep. And now there's a lot of nuances to this as to like picking good movements to train a failure with. What are the benefits and cons of training to failure and all that? We'll discuss that pretty quickly right now, but by and large, a lot of people I see at the gym just simply aren't training hard enough. Like objectively, with another pair of eyes looking at them, I would say like a lot of people have at least, I see people do a set and they have at least 5 more reps to do in them, if not more, until they actually reach that point of muscle failure. And basically the reason behind this, that we want to train close to muscle failure, is because the fact that if we want to see muscle growth, we have to accumulate enough of what's called mechanical tension. And this is basically the amount of tension that your muscles sense while you're lifting weight, because at the end of the day, your muscle doesn't know whether it's lifting 20 pounds, 50 pounds, or 100 pounds. It just knows that it has to produce some sort of tension to a certain load that you're lifting, usually in the form of weights. And when you train close to failure, you are going to get to the point where your muscles have to create a lot of tension in order to move the weight. And so when it has to do this, then your muscle contractions like involuntarily slow down, and it's at this point that your muscles like sense enough of that, and then that's what kind of like makes it like kick off the whole muscle remodeling and regrowth process. And yeah, I don't want to get too much into that, but that's ultimately why we want to be training close to failure, because we want to get to that point of where your muscles have to push hard enough so that it senses that, okay, I need to get stronger, I need to remodel, I need to get bigger for next time we do this, because I don't want the next time around like to be not able to do this. And so this is basically what kind of triggers that muscle growth process. And if you don't train anywhere close to that, you're not going to see any results. And that's just a simple fact. Now I'm saying you don't have to be training to complete muscle failure. You just have to be training close enough to get that stimulus. But the simple fact is, a lot of the follow-up questions I get to this is, how do I know if I'm training close enough to failure? Or, how do I know I'm training hard enough? And basically, my best answer to this question is, because I'm not working with you in person, like, I don't know. Like, the best way to find this out for yourself is by actually doing it and actually, like, pushing yourself to the point muscle failure. And yeah, that's basically it. Doing that and then seeing, like, wow, how did that feel? How can I use that to, implement into my training from here on out? And basically, yeah. And the way I do it with my clients is just like, again, thinking about the contraction speed. So getting really close to muscle failure, the weights are going to slow down because your muscles simply can't contract as fast, because they're just getting to that point of where they can't lift like a lot for any longer. So that's basically a good measure. Like if you get to the point where like you're really grinding out the rep and you're really like pushing for that rep, then that's how you know you're close to muscle failure. And then in terms of movements to train close to failure on, I would say Start off with a lot of machines because it's a lot safer in the sense that, you know, if you do train a muscle fair, you can just drop the weight and you don't like, you have a lower risk of injury versus if you're doing like a barbell squat or some sort of free weight movement where you really have to be controlled and really dialed in with your form, and you can't just like drop the weight, otherwise you'd hurt yourself. But yeah, starting out with machines, trying to really train close to fair and seeing how that feels. And you might be surprised that you are a lot stronger, or you could do a lot more than you originally thought you could. Now, next point on this is not focusing on progressive overload. So there's definitely a lot of people who train hard. There's a lot of people who do a lot in the gym, but if I watch them for, you know, weeks and months, it seems like they're doing the same exact workout with the same exact weight for weeks and months on end, and they're getting no results. And this is simply because they aren't focusing on progressive overload or the act of doing more work over time. That's basically the most simple way to put it. It's doing more work over time, whether that's adding more weight to the amount of to the lift that it is that you're doing, or doing the same amount of weight for more reps, or like focusing on doing the same amount of weight with the same amount of reps, but doing it with better form. And this is simply like one of the basic drivers of muscle growth. Like if you combine training hard enough with training with progressive overload, you're gonna be surprised with how far you can actually get. And progressive overload is simply the fact that like it's basically a good measurement of, is your training program working? Because ultimately progressive overload isn't something that it's not something that you implement into your program, but rather it's something that should happen as a result of your program. Because if you really think about it, if your training program is working, that means you train really close to failure, you're training hard enough, and if your program's actually working, then your muscles are going to be like, okay, we got to remodel so that we can do more next time. And then if you do that, if you come in maybe let's say like next week or a few days later, and you do that same workout and you're able to do that same exact exercise, but you can do it for more weight or for more reps, then that means the remodeling process worked and you actually recovered and you're able to progressive overload and make more progress. And that's a good indicator of whether your program is working or not. And just simply put, a lot of people just don't train hard enough to see that point of progressive overload, or they don't actually try to do that more. I don't know why, but I feel like people are just afraid of working harder, or they just like don't like the feeling of being uncomfortable. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, they don't like the feeling of being uncomfortable, but ultimately the simple fact is, if you want to change your body, if you want to see growth, you're going to have to train hard, you're going to have to get uncomfortable, and you're going to have to implement that progressive overload if you want to keep seeing results. Now, next point is going to be switching up your workouts constantly and not following a program. Now, this is something kind of on the other end of the spectrum for the people who do the same exact workouts every single day with the same exact weights and all that. We have the other people on the other side of the spectrum of switching up your workouts constantly and not following a program. These are going to be the people who come in, do like 10 different machines every day, and then call that a workout. And then the next day they'll come in, do a different set of 10 different machines. And this is not exactly conducive to muscle growth for two reasons. The first reason being that something called the specific adaptation, if I can remember, it's SAID, specific adaptation to impose demands. And basically what this means is that your body will adapt to specific things. Like the more specific it can get, you put your training through your body, then it will adapt to those specific things. Like for example, if you weightlift, your body's gonna get really good at weightlifting, which is kind of obvious there. If you put your body through some sort of stress, it's gonna adapt to that stress. And so there's nothing specific about doing a weightlifting program that's like has like 50 different exercises, because your body's going to be constantly trying to reach and adapt to this and adapt to that and adapt to this other thing. Whereas if you just simply focus on one program with 4 to 5 movements at a time, then your body will get really good at those 4 to 5 movements, and that's when it can actually progress, and that's when you can actually see the results because you're actually practicing those movements. Your body's learning those motor patterns. Your body's learning to adapt to those motor patterns. Finally, and then it can start building muscle using those movement patterns. Whereas if you're constantly switching it up, your body's never going to get a chance to actually adapt to that stimulus, because it's always being like tricked and thrown into all these other different movements. And there's a myth, I don't know if it's still around as much. I definitely know it was very prevalent during my beginning days of strength training, but you don't need to confuse your muscles. Your muscles aren't something that like get used to a movement and it's like, oh, I'm just not going to build muscle using this movement anymore. And this ultimately goes back to, are you training hard enough and are you applying progressive overload? Because that in itself is causing a need for adaptation, is causing a need for your body to grow and build muscle and get stronger. It doesn't need to be doing different movements, because ultimately what that's going to do is just, it's actually not going to build muscle, because then your body has to adapt to that movement first before it starts getting good at it, before it starts building muscle using that movement. And so when you're constantly switching things up, you're confused. Yeah, you're literally confusing your body, but it's not getting any benefits for you in terms of confusing your body. Your body still has to spend a good amount of time adapting to that stimulus. And then that's when it starts like, okay, we got this movement pattern down. Now we're going to start using this movement, and then now we're going to start building muscle on top of this movement. So yeah, stop switching your workouts up constantly. In terms of programming, I like to program anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks for a lot of my clients. I find that's a good amount of time for people to stick to something long enough so that they can see the progression, but also it's kind of riding that fine line between like, are you going to get bored of a program? Like, I know 6 to 8 weeks, if you're falling for something really consistently, you're really milking out the progression, that's when you have a need for change. But obviously this is just my experience with working with people. For me personally, I can literally follow this. I have followed one program for like a year straight, and I just like if I know that I can constantly progress on these movements, then I really don't mind following like that program. And especially if I really like the movements, I don't mind following that program for like a long term. But yeah, stop switching your programs. Pick 4 to 5 movements for each workout that you're doing a day, and really focusing on training hard enough on them, really focus on progressing on them, and you'll find that you'll actually see gains for the first time. And yeah, stick to them for at least 6 to 8 weeks, and then the results will speak for themselves. Now, next point. Ooh, this one. Doing, quote, what the pros do. So, yeah, where do I even begin with this one? So, on social media, there's a huge kind of like disconnect in between people thinking that, oh, just because so-and-so looks really good doing this, or so-and-so is like, an IFBB pro, or this person has accomplished so much because their physique looks this way, and because they were doing it this way. And this is it's not a valid argument for doing something, because number one, some people are just highly genetic responders to weight training, so they can literally grow muscle doing anything. And you probably know some of these people growing up. Like growing up, they were just always athletic. They were always like muscular and jacked, and that's just the way things are. Some people are just going to be naturally good at something. Like you've always had some of those people who are just really good at school and they barely studied, and that's like a good comparison. Like some people are just naturally better at other things than other people, and that's just a simple fact of life. And for these people, like just because you do what they do doesn't mean you're going to get the same exact results, because your genetics can play a factor, the way your body is built can play a factor. But the simple fact is, like, if you can follow a decent training program, and if you apply progressive overload and if you train hard enough, you will see muscle growth. But you shouldn't be following someone else's exact routine thinking you're going to get the same results as them, or even thinking that that's the best way to go about things. And I would say it's hard for me to exactly say who's legit and who's not. But in terms of trying to see who's putting out reliable information, always kind of question like why are they doing it this way? Is it because, you know, is it because the majority of the consensus is kind of like talking about these things and saying these are like a good thing, or is it just because they're doing it for the sake of like getting your attention, or making it seem very clickbaity, or making it seem like this is like the best way? Because there really is no best way. Everyone has different movements that their body will agree with. Everyone has a certain training program or a certain training volume that they need to reach if they want to get results. But yeah, no one program will work for everyone. I mean, there are certain ways to program that will work for most people, but to say that their programming or their style of training is going to work for everyone, or it's going to give you the best results, is just simply untrue. So yeah, rather than thinking like, oh, this person did this to get these results, think about a better indicator that just came to my mind is that how many people has this person worked with, and are they getting results for a lot of different type of varieties of people? Because I think this is the better indicator, because if they can get results for a different variety of people, that means their programming is working in terms of being able to get people results. Because the more people you work, the more different types of people that you work with, this means that your programming is actually beneficial and fitting for a lot of people, versus like being able to get results for like one person or just a few group of people. And you don't know, because some like this small group of people could be very high responders, they could just all have really good genetics, or there's just that single person. Like you, like obviously you know yourself best, so just getting results for yourself is not a good indicator of if you can do this for a wide variety of people. So that's about as much as I wanted to touch on in terms of that topic. So for the next one, it's going to be chasing the pump or the burn. And this is something I see a lot of people do, especially the people who go in and do like a 1 hour workout of like non-stop lifting. And one mistake I see a lot with this is that people who constantly chase this pump or the burn, when you don't rest in between sets, or when you try to do as much as possible, you don't let your body rest enough so that you can, produce the most force, or trying to lift a good amount of weight in order to stimulate that muscle growth. And like I said in the previous point about not resting long enough in between sets, when you're constantly just doing things to chase the pump or to chase the burn, you end up doing a lot of extra exercises, or you end up just hammering out a bunch of sets and reps, and you don't really focus on the foundational processes of trying to build muscle, which is really putting in good quality sets that train close to failure, and applying that concept of progressive overload, because you can't do that without resting long enough, honestly. Like if you want to focus on training close enough to failure and really focusing on progressive overload, you're gonna have to give yourself enough rest, because when you don't give yourself enough rest, then your body's central nervous system, or your brain and your spinal cord, they don't have enough time to rest. And basically what resting does, it allows your central nervous system to recover so that you can recruit more of these what's called motor units. Is basically how your central nervous system communicates to your muscles to contract. And when you don't give them enough time to rest, then you're not going to recruit as many of these motor units, then you're not going to be able to lift as heavy as you could have in the first place. And when you don't do that, then you don't recruit enough muscle fibers, and this ultimately doesn't kick off the whole muscle regrowth and remodeling process, because you're just simply not recruiting enough muscle fibers, enough muscle units to get that like involuntary like slowdown of your muscles contracting really hard. And so yeah, you just have to focus on good quality sets and simply just trying to do as much as possible to chase the pump or to chase the burn. These are also not good indicators of progress. Like I said, these like chasing a feeling for your workout is not a good indicator of whether you're making progress or whether you're getting results or not, but rather, are you making progress from week to week? Are you making progress from month to month? And are you consistently making progress in terms of adding more weight to the bar, doing the same amount of weight for more reps, or doing the same amount of weight and reps with better form. Now, finally, we have the last point here about not being consistent. So this is ultimately the foundational base for why a lot of people don't get results. I would say more so even like compared to everything else, because if there's anything I've said before is that consistency is the key to success, and consistency is going to ultimately what's going to get you the most results. And if you are simply working out right now, like once a week or once every 2 weeks, whenever you feel like it, whenever you feel like a fat, lazy piece of shit, if that's the only time you're going to go in and work out, you're not going to see any results because you're not being consistent. If you're just going in every week, every once a week, or once every 2 weeks, then that's not going to cut it. Because a lot of the reasons why people do this, or not even a lot of the reasons, but here's what most people are at fault of doing when they do this. They, take a week or take 2 weeks off, and then they'll go in, hit super hard, do everything they can possibly can, completely destroy their body, and then a couple days later, they get major DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness, and their entire body is sore. They don't feel like moving. They don't feel like doing anything. And then they're like, okay, I'm super sore. I can't go in tomorrow. I probably can't even go in for the next week. So they'll take a week off, and then eventually that week might turn to 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they're finally recovering from the soreness. And then they try to do it again. They go into the gym, 2-3 weeks later, hit the gym super hard again, and make their body completely sore, and they restart this whole cycle. And then the simple fact is they don't make any progress because they're not consistently going to the gym. They're not consistently stressing their body in order to make progress, in order to adapt. And this is ultimately a lot of the reasons why people don't see progress. But instead, if instead they just took it easy, started slow, but focused on, okay, rather than going in the gym and completely destroying myself, how can I take it sort of easy? Like, we don't want to be so easy that we don't feel like we're doing anything, but we want to go in, stress our body a little bit, maybe focus on 2 to 4 exercises for that day, get a good pump, get some good weights moving, and a day or two later, you feel a little bit of soreness, but you don't feel too bad. And you're like, okay, feel pretty good. Go in the next day, second session of the week, do that same stuff again. And then, okay, I don't feel too bad. And then obviously as you work out more and more, you're going to feel less and less sore because your body is starting to adapt to that stress. And then maybe instead of, every 3 days, now it's every 2 days. They're like, okay, I feel pretty good. I don't feel as sore. I feel stronger. I definitely feel better after working out. And then they'll add in that third session a week. And then eventually they're able to stay consistent and go 3 times a week for, however long, or even possibly even like the rest of their life, of being consistent, having the schedule of going 3 to 4 times a week of strength training, and actually focusing on a few select movements, making really good progress on them, and then just focusing on that, rather than going in, doing like 50 different exercises and completely burning yourself out and destroying yourself, and you're not consistent, and you end up going to the gym 3 to 4 times a month rather than 3 to 4 times a week. And so obviously the person who's able to get into the gym more 3 to 4 times a week and actually be consistent with a training program and really make progress, they're going to see a lot more results than someone who's going in there just 3 to 4 times a month, or even less than that, depending on how much that soreness and how much that fatigue really did a number on them. Then they'll see less results because they're just not as consistent about it. So yeah, that about covers all 10 of the points I wanted to cover for the most common muscle building mistakes that I've seen in my experience. Yeah, my mouth is very dry because I've been talking for like the past hour. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. If you want to be part of my online coaching program, that's going to start in October this month. By the time I release this podcast, it will be up and good to go. And be sure to send an application in. I will reach out to you with an email, just a few more questions, just to kind of get a feel of where you are in your journey and how it can best help you in terms of getting you where you want to go. And From there, we'll set up a call and we'll talk a little bit more about your journey and how I can best help you there. I like to have the face-to-face conversations with people I might be potentially working with, just to build that relationship. Because just honestly, building that relationship online is a lot more difficult than if I were working with you in person. So that's why I like to set up calls in order to meet the people that I might possibly be working with, and to get and for both of us to get a better feel of each other and to see if we're actually a good fit. But yeah, that about wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on for the past hour, and I will catch you in the next one.